Have you ever wondered if just a few simple words could stop a person from destroying everything around them? What if one stranger understood someone's pain better than 20 experts standing in the same room? The emergency call reached the military hospital just before sunrise. A heavy transport vehicle had lost control on a rain-soaked road during a training exercise. Several soldiers were injured, but one officer was in critical condition. The medical team immediately prepared the emergency room. Doctors reviewed every report they had received from the accident scene. Nurses gathered the equipment they would need. Specialists stood ready for surgery if it became necessary. Everyone believed they were prepared. But none of them expected what would happen next. The injured officer was Brigadier Daniel Carter, a respected military commander who had served his country for more than 30 years. He had survived dangerous missions, difficult battles, and countless life-threatening situations. His body carried old scars. His mind carried even deeper ones. When the ambulance arrived, everything seemed under control. His breathing was stable. His heartbeat was being monitored carefully. The doctors believed they had enough time to treat him properly. Then Daniel slowly opened his eyes. The room changed in a single second. Instead of seeing doctors and nurses, his injured mind saw danger. Instead of seeing a hospital, he believed he had awakened inside an enemy building. Years of military training took over before anyone could explain where he was. He pulled the oxygen mask from his face, and forced Dan crashed onto the floor. A nearby doctor stepped backward after nearly being struck. Nobody expected such speed from a man with serious injuries. Daniel wasn't screaming. He wasn't acting wildly. Every movement had purpose. Every motion looked like someone protecting himself during combat. His eyes moved across the room, searching every corner. Every person became a possible threat. The senior physician, Dr. Laura Mitchell, calmly stepped forward with both hands visible. "Daniel," she said gently, "you're safe." He never seemed to hear her. Instead, he watched her exactly as a soldier watches an unknown person entering a dangerous area. She stopped walking. She understood getting closer might only make things worse. Another doctor tried speaking from a different angle. Nothing changed. A nurse attempted to calm him. He immediately reacted by moving away. Minute after minute passed. The medical staff tried everything they had learned during years of training. They spoke softly. They avoided sudden movements. They explained where he was. None of it reached him. It was as if his mind had traveled back decades into one of the worst moments of his military career. After 20 minutes, hospital security arrived. They looked inside the room. Then they looked at Daniel. Finally, they quietly stepped back. Nobody wanted to risk making the situation even more dangerous. The doctors discussed using medication to calm him. There was only one problem. Someone had to get close enough to give the injection. No one could. 35 minutes passed. The emergency room felt completely different now. Machines continued beeping. Staff whispered urgently. Every second mattered because Daniel's brain injury still needed treatment. But no one could reach him safely. At that same moment, another nurse was walking through the hospital hallway to begin her morning shift. Her name was Olivia Brooks. She had worked at the Veterans Hospital for several years. Most people knew her as someone quiet. She rarely spoke more than necessary. She never tried to attract attention. She simply arrived every morning, cared for her patients, and went home. As she walked toward her department, she heard something unusual coming from one of the emergency rooms. She didn't hear shouting. She didn't hear panic. She heard something else. She heard the sound of trained professionals losing control of a situation. It was a sound she recognized immediately. Her footsteps slowed. She stood outside the closed door for several seconds. Without asking permission, she gently pushed the door open. Everyone inside looked toward her. Dr. Mitchell quickly noticed another nurse entering during an active emergency. "This area is restricted," she said firmly. "Please wait outside." Olivia didn't answer. She carefully looked around the room. She noticed every doctor's position. She noticed every nurse keeping a safe distance. Most importantly, she watched Daniel. Not his hands. Not his injuries. His eyes. She recognized the way they moved. They weren't searching randomly. They were following military patterns. His breathing was controlled. His shoulders remained ready for action. His body wasn't confused. It believed it was surviving another battlefield. Something inside Olivia quietly changed. She took one slow step forward. Nobody understood why. Dr. Mitchell spoke again. "Please stop." Olivia kept walking. She moved differently than everyone else had. She didn't approach him directly. She didn't speak loudly. She didn't try to convince him. She simply approached from an angle that seemed strangely familiar. Daniel's eyes immediately followed her. The room became completely silent. Several doctors expected another violent reaction. Instead, Olivia leaned close enough for only one person to hear her. She whispered 6 simple words. Nobody else in the room heard them. They were spoken so quietly that even the nurse standing nearby couldn't understand. Then something impossible happened. Daniel froze. Completely. His shoulders relaxed. His breathing slowed. His hands stopped searching for danger. The terrifying tension disappeared almost instantly. 20 medical professionals stared in complete disbelief. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound left inside the room was the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Daniel slowly turned his head toward Olivia. For several long seconds, he simply looked at her face. It was as though he had finally recognized someone he trusted. Dr. Mitchell couldn't believe what she was seeing. For 40 minutes, every medical technique had failed. One quiet sentence had succeeded. Daniel finally spoke. His voice sounded weak, rough, and tired. "What division?" The question confused everyone except Olivia. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she gently adjusted the blanket covering his shoulder. Then she looked into his eyes. "You already know," she replied softly. Daniel continued staring at her. Neither of them smiled. Neither explained anything. But something had clearly passed between them that nobody else could understand. Dr. Mitchell slowly approached again. This time Daniel didn't react. She carefully reconnected the heart monitor. Another nurse replaced the oxygen mask. Someone restarted the 4. Daniel allowed every procedure. Not because he suddenly trusted everyone. Because he trusted Olivia. Every few minutes his eyes returned to her. Each time he saw she was still standing nearby, he relaxed a little more. The doctors quietly continued their work. No one interrupted. At that moment, saving Daniel's life mattered more than satisfying anyone's curiosity. After nearly an hour, the emergency team finally completed the first stage of treatment. Scans confirmed Daniel had suffered a serious brain injury. Without proper care, the damage could become much worse. The doctors prepared for the next steps. While they discussed treatment plans, Daniel remained unusually calm. His attention stayed fixed on Olivia. Eventually he spoke again. "I asked about your division." Olivia folded her hands calmly. "I heard your question." Daniel waited. She didn't continue. Finally he spoke once more. "The words you whispered." He paused. Only one person would know them. Several people in the room exchanged confused glances. Olivia looked down briefly before meeting his eyes again. "Some memories belong to the people who lived them," she answered. Daniel slowly nodded. He didn't ask another question. Instead, he leaned back against the hospital bed. For the first time since arriving, he truly looked exhausted. Dr. Mitchell watched both of them carefully. She realized this wasn't luck. There was history here. A history nobody else in the room understood. Yet whatever connected these two people had just saved an entire emergency operation. Sometimes medical science saves lives. Sometimes experience saves lives. And sometimes, only another wounded soul knows exactly how to reach someone who has become lost inside their own memories. The doctors continued preparing Daniel for further treatment, but every person in that room knew they had just witnessed something they would never forget. None of them realized this was only the beginning of a much deeper story. Daniel rested quietly while the medical staff continued checking his condition. The emergency room slowly returned to normal, but no one had forgotten what had happened only minutes earlier. Doctors whispered to one another. Nurses exchanged confused looks. Everyone wanted to ask Olivia the same question. How had she done it? But this was not the right time. Saving Daniel's life remained the first priority. As more test results arrived, Dr. Laura Mitchell carefully reviewed every scan. The images showed bleeding inside Daniel's brain. It was not massive, but it was dangerous. Without surgery, the pressure inside his skull would continue increasing. The sooner doctors acted, the better his chances would be. Meanwhile, Olivia quietly stood near the wall. She never tried to explain herself. She never asked for attention. She simply stayed where Daniel could see her. Every few minutes, he looked toward her. Every time their eyes met, his heartbeat remained steady. It was almost as if her presence reminded him that he was no longer on a battlefield. Nearly an hour later, Daniel became more alert. His breathing was stronger. His speech became clearer. He slowly looked around the room. This time he finally noticed the hospital equipment. He recognized the doctors. He noticed the nurses working around him. Then he looked back at Olivia. "I remember your voice," he said quietly. Olivia smiled only slightly. "That's enough for today." Daniel closed his eyes for a few seconds before speaking again. "No." His voice remained weak. "I've heard that voice before." Nobody else understood what he meant. Dr. Mitchell carefully stepped closer. "Colonel," she said gently, "we need to discuss your scan results." Daniel nodded. The doctor explained everything honestly. She described the bleeding. She explained the risks. She showed him the medical images. Finally, she reached the difficult part. "We recommend immediate surgery." The room became silent again. Daniel listened without interrupting. When she finished, he looked directly at her. "I won't do it." The answer surprised everyone. Dr. Mitchell remained calm. "May I ask why?" Daniel looked toward the ceiling. "I've spent my entire life making difficult decisions." He paused. "This one is mine." The doctors continued explaining. They described every possible outcome. They explained the dangers of refusing treatment. They answered every question patiently. Still, Daniel refused. He wasn't confused. He wasn't angry. His decision was clear. Hospital policy required doctors to confirm whether a patient was mentally capable of making such an important choice. Dr. Mitchell carefully performed another evaluation. Daniel answered every question correctly. He knew his name. He knew the date. He understood his condition. Legally, the decision belonged to him. The room grew heavy with disappointment. Everyone knew surgery could save his life. But nobody could force him. Olivia quietly watched the conversation. She noticed something the others had missed. Daniel wasn't refusing because he feared surgery. He was carrying something much heavier. A burden no medical scan could reveal. Just then, another nurse entered the room. She walked over to Olivia. "Someone is asking for you outside." Olivia excused herself and stepped into the hallway. Near the waiting area sat a young soldier. His uniform was dirty. Small scratches covered his hands. He stared at the floor without moving. He looked exhausted. His name was Private Ethan Walker. Only 23 years old. He had been driving the military vehicle involved in the accident. Physically, he was almost unharmed. Emotionally, he looked completely broken. Olivia slowly walked toward him. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she quietly sat beside him. Not on a chair. On the floor. At exactly the same level. Ethan finally spoke. "I shouldn't be here. I should still be at the base." Another long pause. "My commander is inside because of me." His voice began shaking. "The road was wet. I knew it. I should have slowed down. I didn't." He covered his face with both hands. "I destroyed his life." Tears slowly rolled down his cheeks. Olivia didn't interrupt. She simply allowed him to speak. For the first time since the accident, someone wasn't trying to stop his emotions. Several minutes passed. Finally, Ethan looked toward her. "Can you tell me something honestly?" Olivia nodded. "Do you think he'll ever forgive me?" She looked at him carefully before answering. "I don't know." Ethan lowered his head again. Most people would have offered comforting words. Most people would have said, "It wasn't your fault." But Olivia knew empty comfort rarely healed real guilt. Instead, she quietly shared a story. "Several years ago," she began, "I had to make a decision during an emergency. It lasted less than 3 seconds. I followed my training. I saved one life. But another person died before I could reach them. Ethan listened carefully. The investigation later proved I made the correct decision. She smiled sadly. But knowing that didn't remove the pain. I carried it every single day. Ethan looked surprised. You. She nodded. Some wounds never appear on the body. The hallway became quiet again. People walked past them without noticing. Doctors hurried between departments. Patients spoke with family members. Life continued all around them. But inside that small corner of the hospital, 2 people shared something much more important. Truth. Ethan finally asked, "So, does the guilt disappear?" Olivia thought for several seconds. "No," she answered honestly. "It becomes lighter. You learn how to carry it. But it never completely leaves." Ethan slowly nodded. For some reason, that answer helped more than false hope ever could. She reached into her pocket and removed a small hospital note card. On the back she wrote the name of a military counselor. She also wrote the number of a veterans support program. "When you're ready," she said, "talk to someone. You don't have to carry this alone." Ethan carefully accepted the card. "Thank you." As he stood to leave, he stopped. "Can I ask you one question?" Olivia nodded. "What did you whisper to him?" She smiled gently. Something only he needed to hear. Before Ethan could ask another question, the elevator doors opened. He stepped inside. Just before they closed, he looked back. For the first time that morning, there was a little hope in his eyes. Olivia quietly returned to Daniel's room. Inside, the atmosphere had become even more serious. Several surgeons had arrived. Medical files covered the nearby table. Dr. Mitchell looked worried. As Olivia entered, Daniel immediately looked toward her. She understood. He had been waiting. The surgeon carefully explained the situation once more. "If we delay much longer," he said, "your chances will become much lower." Daniel remained silent. He still refused. One by one, the doctors left the room. Finally, only 3 people remained. Daniel, Dr. Mitchell, Olivia. For nearly a minute, nobody spoke. Then Olivia quietly pulled a chair beside Daniel's bed. She sat down. Neither of them looked away. "I met the young driver," she finally said. Daniel remained silent. "He's blaming himself." Still no response. "He believes he ruined your life." Daniel slowly closed his eyes. "I know," Olivia continued softly. "He thinks he'll carry this forever." Daniel's expression changed. Only slightly, but enough for her to notice. "You understand that feeling." This time Daniel looked directly at her. "More than anyone." Olivia nodded. "So do I." Neither of them needed to explain further. Some experiences require no explanation between people who have survived similar pain. Daniel quietly asked, "Did you tell him everything would be okay?" "No." "What did you tell him?" "The truth." He waited. "I told him guilt, but only if you allow other people to help." Daniel stared silently at the hospital ceiling. His breathing slowed. He wasn't thinking about surgery anymore. He was thinking about something much deeper. For the first time that day, he wasn't acting like a soldier. He was simply a man remembering every decision that had shaped his life. Daniel remained quiet after Olivia finished speaking. The room felt completely still. Outside the hospital window, the rain had finally stopped. Soft sunlight slowly pushed through the clouds, filling the room with a warm glow. For several long moments, nobody said anything. Dr. Mitchell respected the silence. She understood that this was no longer a medical conversation. It had become something much more personal. Daniel finally took a slow breath. "I've spent my whole life teaching soldiers to accept responsibility." He looked down at his hands. "But no one ever taught us how to forgive ourselves." Olivia listened carefully. She didn't interrupt. Daniel continued. "I've lost good people. I've made decisions that saved hundreds. I've also made decisions that still visit me every night." His voice became softer. "You never stop wondering if another choice could have changed everything." Olivia nodded gently. Every person who has carried responsibility knows that feeling. Daniel smiled sadly. You understand. Ido. Another silence filled the room. This time it felt peaceful instead of heavy. Dr. Mitchell slowly stepped forward again. Colonel, she said kindly, no one here wants to take your choice away. We only want to give you the chance to keep living. Daniel looked toward Olivia. If I agree. He paused. What happens to the young driver? Olivia answered honestly. He'll still blame himself. Daniel closed his eyes. But your decision today will help determine how long he carries that burden. Those words stayed in the room. Daniel slowly leaned back against the pillow. He remembered the frightened face of the young soldier. He remembered every young recruit he had trained over 3 decades. He remembered telling them that true leaders protect their people, even after the battle ends. Suddenly he realized something. This battle had not ended. It had only changed. Now the enemy wasn't fear. It wasn't pain. It wasn't injury. It was hopelessness. And if he refused treatment, someone else would spend the rest of his life believing he had caused the death of his commander. Daniel quietly looked toward the ceiling. He whispered something almost too soft to hear. I can't let that happen. Dr. Mitchell remained perfectly still. She didn't rush him. She knew the decision had to belong entirely to him. Nearly 10 minutes passed. Nobody spoke. The bleeding had been stopped. The pressure on Daniel's brain had been relieved. His recovery would take time. But he would live. News spread quickly throughout the hospital. The atmosphere completely changed. Smiles replaced worried faces. Even staff members who had never met Daniel felt relieved. A life had been saved. The next morning Daniel slowly opened his eyes once again. This time there was no confusion. No fear. No combat instincts. Only peace. He immediately recognized where he was. Dr. Mitchell entered the room. Welcome back. Daniel smiled. I suppose you were right. She laughed softly. I tried to be. Recovery wasn't easy. Simple movements became difficult. Walking required patience. Physical therapy tested his determination. But every day he became a little stronger. Every afternoon Olivia visited his room for a few minutes. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they simply sat quietly. Neither felt uncomfortable with silence. One afternoon Daniel asked, Why did you leave the military? Olivia looked out the window before answering. Because I wanted to save lives without carrying a weapon. Daniel understood immediately. He didn't ask another question. Some answers are complete even when they are short. Several days later, Ethan returned to the hospital. This time he looked different. His uniform was clean. His posture was stronger. His eyes still carried sadness. But they also carried purpose. He quietly knocked on Daniel's door. Permission to enter, sir? Daniel smiled. Always. Ethan stepped inside. For several seconds neither man spoke. Finally the young soldier stood straight. I'm sorry. Daniel slowly shook his head. No. Ethan looked confused. The accident happened. We learn. We improve. But we don't destroy ourselves forever because of one terrible day. Tears filled Ethan's eyes. I thought you'd hate me. Daniel smiled warmly. I've spent my life leading young soldiers. If I stopped believing in them after one mistake, I never deserved to lead them in the first place. Those words broke the final wall inside Ethan's heart. He quietly wiped away his tears. Thank you, sir. Daniel looked toward the hallway. Someone else deserves that thank you even more. Both men knew exactly who he meant. Daniel continued recovering day by day. The doctors were pleased with his progress. His speech became stronger. His balance slowly improved. Every small achievement reminded him that choosing surgery had been the right decision. Still, one question remained in his mind. Who was Olivia really? She never talked about herself. She never mentioned her past. Whenever someone praised her, she simply smiled and changed the subject. To everyone else, she was just another dedicated nurse. But Daniel knew there was much more behind those quiet eyes. A week later, he was finally allowed to walk through the hospital with assistance. One afternoon, while taking a slow walk down the hallway, he noticed Olivia helping an elderly veteran learn how to stand again after months in bed. She encouraged him patiently. You've already done the hardest part. The old man laughed. I don't think I have. You showed up today. She smiled. That's always the hardest part. Daniel watched silently from the end of the hallway. She treated every patient exactly the same. She didn't care about medals. She didn't care about rank. She didn't care whether someone had once been a commander or a private soldier. To her, every person deserved kindness. That was her greatest strength. Later that afternoon, Daniel quietly asked Dr. Mitchell, "How long has Olivia worked here?" "Almost 6 years. And no one knows her military background?" Dr. Mitchell shook her head. "She never talks about it." Daniel smiled softly. That sounds exactly like her. Several more days passed. Physical therapy became easier. Daniel regained confidence with every step. Then one morning another familiar face appeared outside his room. It was Ethan. This time he looked completely different. The fear that had once filled his face had almost disappeared. He carried himself with quiet confidence. "Sir," he said with a smile, "I've started counseling." Daniel nodded proudly. "Good. I almost didn't go. What changed your mind?" Ethan thought for a moment. "I remembered something Olivia told me." Daniel looked interested. "What was it?" Ethan smiled. "She said carrying pain alone doesn't make you stronger. It only makes the journey longer." Daniel quietly repeated the words to himself. He realized she had been helping both of them from the very beginning. Not with complicated advice. Not with long speeches. Just simple truths spoken at exactly the right moment. A few days later Daniel was officially cleared to leave the hospital. Doctors completed the final examinations. His recovery would continue at home, but the dangerous part was over. Before leaving, he asked one final favor. "I'd like to speak with Olivia." When she arrived, neither of them spoke immediately. They simply smiled. Sometimes silence says more than words. Finally Daniel broke the silence. "I owe you my life." Olivia gently shook her head. "No. You made your own decision. You only reminded me why it mattered." She smiled. "Sometimes that's enough." Daniel reached into his small travel bag. He removed a folded envelope. "I'd like you to have this." Olivia looked at it but didn't open it. "What is it?" "A letter." "And inside?" "My recommendation." She looked confused. "For what?" "So people finally know who you really are." Olivia immediately handed the envelope back. "I don't need recognition." Daniel smiled. "I know. That's exactly why you deserve it." She remained silent. Daniel continued. "For years you've helped people without asking for anything. You deserve to be seen." Olivia looked down at the envelope. After several moments she accepted it. Not because she wanted praise, but because refusing would only continue hiding the truth. Before Daniel left, the two shook hands. It wasn't the handshake of a patient and a nurse. It was the handshake of two people who understood one another without needing long explanations. As Daniel walked toward the hospital exit, many staff members quietly applauded. Doctors, nurses, reception workers, cleaning staff. Everyone smiled. Not because a military officer was leaving, but because another life had been saved. Life inside the hospital soon returned to normal. New patients arrived every day. New emergencies came through the doors. New families waited anxiously for good news. Olivia continued working exactly as she always had. She arrived before sunrise. She checked every patient's condition carefully. She comforted frightened families. She encouraged people who wanted to give up. Nothing about her routine changed. Several days later, the hospital director invited Olivia into his office. She wondered if something was wrong. Instead, she found Daniel's letter waiting on the desk. The director looked at her kindly. "I never knew." Olivia smiled politely. There wasn't much to tell. He slowly opened the letter. Inside was a formal recommendation describing her years of military service and the courage she had shown long before becoming a nurse. Much of it remained confidential. But one message stood out clearly. Some heroes stop serving after leaving the battlefield. Others simply choose a different battlefield. The director looked at Olivia. "You've never wanted attention." "No. But every person in this hospital deserves to know the kind of colleague they work beside. Olivia smiled warmly. They already know. They know I'm a nurse. And that's enough. The director slowly folded the letter. For a long moment he simply looked at her. Then he nodded. I think I understand. From that day forward, nothing really changed. Olivia didn't receive a special office. She didn't ask for a higher position. She didn't expect applause. She continued doing exactly what she loved. Helping people. One patient at a time. One family at a time. One difficult conversation at a time. Months later, Daniel returned to the hospital. Not as a patient, but as a visitor. He walked confidently through the same hallway where fear had once controlled him. This time he carried flowers. Not for himself. For the nurse's station. When he reached Olivia, he placed the flowers on the desk. They're beautiful, she said. They're a thank you. You've already thanked me. I don't think I ever can. Both of them laughed. Nearby, Ethan had also come to visit. He had completed his counseling program. He had returned to duty with greater confidence and maturity. Looking at both of them together, Olivia smiled. One life had been saved through surgery. Another had been saved through forgiveness. And both recoveries had begun with 6 quiet words spoken at exactly the right moment. As Daniel prepared to leave once again, he turned back toward Olivia. You know. She looked at him. People will probably never hear the words you whispered that day. Olivia smiled. They don't need to. They only need to remember what those words accomplished. Daniel nodded. Some stories aren't remembered because of famous speeches. Some are remembered because one person chose kindness when everyone else had run out of answers. As Daniel disappeared through the hospital doors, Olivia returned to her patients. Another call bell rang. Another family needed comfort. Another person needed hope. Without hesitation, she walked forward. Because heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear simple blue scrubs. Sometimes they work quietly where almost nobody notices them. Sometimes their greatest victory is helping someone believe in tomorrow. And sometimes, the most powerful words in the world are the ones spoken so softly that only one heart can hear them.